Welcome to the Garland County Historical Society's September meeting. It seems like a long time since we were here in May, and the bumps are up here with their rocking chairs, doesn't it? Yes, it really does. Welcome back to our fall season. We're going to ask Kyle Clem to come up here. He's a board member. He's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Y'all stand?
Yeah, stand if you're able. There's the flag to your left. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Kyle. You all have received your minutes from that May meeting. If you've had a chance to read it, we need to approve them as read. Do we have a motion? I think Kyle was the first, and Julie Nix is second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you. The minutes will be approved as read. Now I'm going to ask Julie Nix to come up here and tell you a little bit about our Hidden Hot Springs coming up. You want to come up?
Yeah, Julie. Yes, unexpected, but I can do extemporaneous anytime. Yes, I just wanted to let you know that on October the 1st, we are having our 4th Hidden Hot Springs, and what that is a tour of 2 residences that generally they're private residents, so they're not available to the public. This year we have the Kramer Harmon House, which is on 2nd Street, and which we suspect is one of the oldest structures still standing in Hot Springs. It was part of the original Jonestown, and the other is the Burgower Rudisill home, which is on Quapaw, and it's one of the oldest structures there. It was not harmed by the fire because it wasn't there. So, but it is a brick structure, and I suspect that's why it's brick. But it's a beautifully restored house that was built in 1924. Tickets are available. I'm sure you could buy them right here. You can go to the back today and buy them. You can buy them online. You can come by the Historical Society. They're $75 each, and of course all of the proceeds go to the Historical Society, and this is our major fundraiser every year. So if you want us to keep going, you need to go.
Thank you, Julie. Now Liz wanted me to mention our new t-shirts. We've been busy this summer. We've had a complete redesign of our website. We're very proud of it. Kyle Clem was involved with our webmaster, Kelly Dotson, both local boys, working on our new website. If you get a chance, go on there. Now you can go on there and you can order a ticket to the Hidden Hot Springs through the web page. Yeah. And I want to tell you that whenever you buy anything through our website, your receipt will show as a PayPal receipt. It won't say Garland County, it will say PayPal Garland, and then that'll be it. We work through PayPal for all of our purchases online, so I just want you all to be aware of that. And Tom French always wants me to tell you and for you all to know that we are a 501c nonprofit organization, and we run and solely by your memberships and donations and our corporate sponsors who you saw sign when you came in today is AT&T, National Park, Souvenirs and Gifts, Myers Realty, and Quapaw Bass and Spa. So now we're going to hear from our Executive Director, Liz Robbins.
Thank you. Thank y'all for being here today. First announcement, please put on your calendars our October meeting, which will be the 3rd Tuesday. The rest of the meetings this year will be on the 3rd Tuesdays of the month. That's October. You know Ron Fuller. He gave a great program last year about Whittington Avenue that a lot of people enjoyed. And this time he's searched his fabulous postcard collection and come up with cards about hot springs hotels. Not the big giants that you've seen so much of, like the Arlington and the Eastman, but the mid-level and small ones like the Del Mar and the Eddy, and some motor courts like the Belle de Rose. And it's really fascinating. I think you'll enjoy it. Another save the date is the date of our annual Christmas dinner. That'll be the third Tuesday in December, December 19th. So put that on your calendar, and more details about it'll be at the Hot Springs Country Club. Cocktail hour starts at 5:30, December 19th, and more details about how to get reservations and what the menu is will be announced later. Now today we are delighted to welcome our speaker, John Dechant. We owe him a really big thank you because he didn't come here from Oklahoma or even Kansas to get here. He came down from Nebraska to be with us today, so we really appreciate it. He's a graduate of Omaha's Creighton University, where of course he was on the golf team, and he received the award for the team's most inspirational player, and I think that says something very nice about the person. He's president today of a company called Legacy Preservation, which is a publishing firm. And he's very, very active in civic activities, which I won't take up your time listing, but he's a really good guy. He loves to write. He's the author of several books which have been published to great reviews. He also has written articles in a variety of magazines and the Golfer's Journal. Now, we got to know John when he came down to the archives last year to find out if we had any information about a Hot Springs native he wanted to write a book about. And we truly enjoyed the time he spent with us. He's smart, he's a really nice man with a great sense of humor, and he loves finding the facts. He is also, as you will find when you read his book, a terrific writer. And how he came to write about a Hot Springs boy is a story he is now going to tell you. So please welcome John.
How about that? The technology's working so far.
No.
Well, Liz, thank you for that great introduction. That's about the best introduction I've ever gotten.
It's all true, all true.
I appreciate that. And apologies to those of you who thought you were coming to a lecture on Paul Runyan and Dave's Blue Ox. I'll try not to let you down talking about Paul Runyan. I promise if you look deep enough, Paul Runyan is just as interesting. A couple quick thank yous before I start. Of course, I want to thank you, Liz Robbins, and everybody at the Garland County Historical Society. When I was here about 18 months ago, you were incredibly helpful, enthusiastic as well, and I really enjoyed my couple of days here. And we were joking when I arrived today, it's a little rainy out today, and for that I thank you all for coming out. The day I left when I was here in April of 2022, there were tornado watches and thunderstorm warnings, and I got about 40 minutes out of town and had to pull off to the side of the road. The rain was so hard. But fortunately, it was just momentary, and I made it back to Omaha safely. But had a great visit and really appreciate your hospitality, so it's great to be back. I also want to thank the staff of the Garland County Library today for having me out, and then thank all of you for showing up in the rain with your umbrellas. I appreciate it, and it's great to be with you. So what I'd like to do today is read basically a version of my stump speech for this book. I joke with people that I have a long version, a short version, an in-between version, And then today's version is going to be the Hot Springs version, where I try to really bring out some of the Hot Springs flavor. So, and the other thing I have is a PowerPoint presentation, and it's about a dozen slides, mostly photographs, that show Paul Runyan in various stages throughout his life. And I'll kind of flip through it as I go, and if there's a noteworthy photo, I'll draw your attention to it. But before all that, I'd like to attempt, if the technology allows, to play just a short, about a 90-second video. This was the trailer, as we call it, for my book, which just gives kind of an overview of what the book is about and the story of Paul Runyan's life. So if the technology cooperates, I will play this. Across the road from the Arkansas dairy farm where he was raised, Paul Runyan nurtured a dream. There he fell in love with golf, first as a caddy, then as a player and apprentice to the head pro at Hot Springs Country Club. In 1921, Runyan told his father that he planned to make golf his life's work. His first decade as a professional was a struggle. Runyan was slightly built and a short hitter. To compete with longer hitters, he had to find other advantages, so he focused his time around the greens and developed what some consider to be the best short game in the history of golf. In 1930, Runyan notched a surprise victory at the prestigious North and South Open, held at Pinehurst, North Carolina. With his wife Joan always by his side, Runyan continued his winning ways throughout the Great Depression, when purses were small and money was tight. His greatest triumph came at the 1938 PGA Championship, where the only man standing in his way was Sam Snead, the long-hitting country boy from the backwoods of Virginia, widely considered to be the best golfer in the world. Runyan's searing short game and small frame caused one sports writer to give him a nickname, Little Poison.
My trouble seems so far away. I like being around. He's always, I think, going to put
There we go. Close that web browser. All right. So, let's see if I can get this to T-Bit. Okay. I'd say all things considered, the technology was pretty cooperative there. Shortly before 10:30 a.m. on Saturday, July 16th, 1938, just 2 days after millionaire aviator and movie producer Howard Hughes and a crew of 3 landed in front of 25,000 people at New York's Floyd Bennett Airport, having flown his Lockheed Super Electra around the world in a record time of 3 days, 19 hours, 14 minutes, and 10 seconds, a handshake took place on the first tee of the Shawnee Country Club in Shawnee-on-the-Delaware, Pennsylvania, a remote vacation oasis along the banks of the Delaware River, between 2 men about to tussle over 36 holes for the right to raise the Wanamaker Trophy, the prize given to the winner of golf's PGA Championship. One of those men, Samuel Jackson Snead, then just 26 years old, the youngest of 5 boys from the backwoods of Virginia, whose upbringing, as the legend had it, was reminiscent, at least to me, of the hero from Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good, about the boy from the woods and the evergreens who could play a guitar just like he was ringing a bell, wore a long-sleeved button-down shirt and a necktie, and a tam o'shanter cap, which he removed for the handshake. On the other end of that handshake was a slightly built, transplanted Southern gentleman of 30, wearing dark blue pleated slacks, a light-colored golf shirt with button-down pockets on the left and right breast, with his first name stitched onto the collar, and a pork pie hat, which, like Snead, he removed for the handshake. That man was Paul Runyan, then the head golf professional at Metropolis Country Club in White Plains, New York. My book, Little Poison, is in part the story of this scene at Shawnee, and it's the story of these 2 men in the subsequent 6 or so hours they spent together playing a golf match, which I contend should be regarded among the most consequential contests in the history of the sport. I say consequential, but you might also use words such as shocking, staggering, mind-blowing, legend-making, or quite simply just rare. Rare because it was the kind of moment that made everyone pause and reconsider everything they thought they knew about golf and about competition. In one corner, to borrow a boxing analogy, you had Sam Snead, young and vibrant, socially awkward in large crowds, with his beautiful golf swing virtually unmatched in its rhythm and grace, walloping through the professional golf circuit in 1938, collecting wins, collecting trophies, and considering the times, collecting rather large paychecks. Snead was golf's shiny new object. And for all the praise that came with his golf ability, he received just as much attention for his backwoods upbringing. Why? None other than legendary golf journalist Herbert Warren Wind, famous for coining the phrase Amen Corner, that critical stretch of golf on the second nine at Augusta National, was as fascinated with Snead as anyone. He was fascinated by Snead's country upbringing and his bonanza-like insight into every tree, shrub, snake, and beast that grew or roamed on the vast ponderosa that was the Snead homestead in Hot Springs, Virginia. In Sam's neck of the woods, the man who could bring in a wildcat alive was highly esteemed, Wynn once wrote. Sam brought in 3. And in the other corner, you had Paul Runyan, shortish and slightly built, weighing just 130 pounds with a sleeve of golf balls stuffed in his pocket, who swung with a choppy rhythm, and he always seemed to walk like he was running 5 minutes late for an important meeting. He was intelligent and good-looking, with a beautiful wife, and yes, I'll say it, a rather ugly golf swing. Ugly for a professional, anyway. He barely hit the ball farther than your average insurance salesman or ad executive. But he owned what many, myself included, consider to be the best short game in the history of golf. This was, as the great sports writer Grantland Rice dubbed it, the old battle between a hard puncher and a boxer. It was length versus cunning, brains versus brawn. This was the Princeton offense versus Showtime. If you like contrasting styles of play, this was your match. And it took place at a resort course in the Pocono Mountains. A course, in fact, the first course, designed by the legendary designer Albert Waring Tillinghast, commonly known as A.W., the well-dressed, smooth-talking, waxed mustache-wearing, self-proclaimed creator of the double dogleg. That part always trips me up. But there's more to Runyan's story than this one epic moment in time with the great Sam Snead. My book is the story of Runyan's life, centered around that moment with Snead, yes, but well-versed, I hope, in the entirety of Runyan's life. A life that began at 19 Baker Street here in Hot Springs, Arkansas. An address which I dare you to go try and find, by the way. And soon transitioned to a dairy farm just a stone's throw from the Hot Springs Golf and Country Club, designed by the great Willie Park Jr. It had been a bit of a turbulent start on that Arkansas dairy farm. Runyan's father was ill, and Paul and his brother, despite their best efforts, were unprepared for the responsibility of operating a dairy in their early teenage years. But still they tried. But the golf course across the road presented an entirely other opportunity. There, Runyan would learn to caddy, and he became an apprentice to the pro, Jimmy Norton, a transplanted Scot who somehow wound up in Arkansas. The game was a struggle at first. Early in life, golf did not come easily for Runyan, and I suppose you could say it never did. And I suppose that's part of his appeal. A little bit like the great Ben Hogan. In 1921, the same year that Runyan and his father had a come-to-Jesus moment over golf, a game which his father at some level despised, Runyan learned that in order to compete as a golfer, he had two options. He could go home and milk more cows to get stronger under the watchful eye of his father, or he could get really good, or clever as he put it, at hitting short shots. He opted for the latter. It was a choice made out of necessity, he claimed, and he began a lifelong love affair with golf's short game, and it would go a long way toward determining his future success as a player. Now let me detour just a moment and talk about his parents. Walter Runyan, Paul's father, had been born in Tennessee, where his parents were from, in the year 1882. Walter's wife, Mamie, came into this life 2 years later here in Arkansas, born to a father who hailed from Texas and a mother from Tennessee. In Hot Springs, Walter Runyan worked a series of jobs, including stints as a fireman and a truck driver for a laundry, before ultimately setting his sights on something more permanent with long-term potential: dairy farming. For a while, Walter pursued dairy farming as an employee of the Majestic Hotel, managing its dairy farm here in Hot Springs. The job paid $120 per month. As his boys came of age and started to handle more of the labor, Walter asked the Majestic for a family raise, but he was denied. Around that same time, he was stricken with an illness, reportedly tuberculosis, which sent him into the state sanatorium for 5 years, and it limited him physically and thus stunted the output of his dairy farm. So the boys, Paul and his brother Elmo, had to step up and help the family operate the dairy. About that brother of his, Elmo. Elmo was the older of the two boys, having been born in 1905. In adulthood, he would make a name for himself as a U.S. Navy commander. He was classified as an electronics engineer, and he later took postgraduate work at the University of Tennessee. In 1942, then Lieutenant Elmo Runyan, by then a Navy man for some 2 decades, was standing on the flight deck of the USS Wasp, which is pictured here, a 740-foot-long aircraft carrier, where he served as the chief machinist, when the Japanese torpedoed that ship while it was transporting reinforcements. The force of the explosions sent men and equipment flying around the decks of the Wasp, and Elmo, who had just gotten out of an aircraft he'd been flying for some 4 hours, jumped to his battle station on the hangar deck as Assistant Damage Control Officer to help battle the fire. After orders were given to abandon ship, Runyan remained among the last to leave the Wasp. Nearly 200 people were killed in that attack, and the Wasp would sink 7 hours later. The ship's wreckage was discovered in 2019 at the bottom of the sea off the coast of Australia. Elmo Runyan, having survived the attack on the Wasp, retired from the Navy in 1962 and returned here to Hot Springs, where he would spend the rest of his life. He became one of the city's most prominent civic leaders. He was a member of the Baptist Church, a 32nd degree Mason, president of the Shrine Club, and a member of the Elks Lodge and the Oddfellows Lodge. He later became manager of the Hot Springs Convention Auditorium. His nephew once described him to me as a cigar-chomping classic Navy guy. Elmo would die in 1971 at age 66, and 2 years later, the Oddfellows Lodge at 719 Whittington Avenue would get named in his honor. When his brother Paul wasn't helping his father and his brother run the dairy, he became intrigued by the golf club across the road from the family dairy farm. There he would find opportunity, and he would find his future. You might not know it, but the city of Hot Springs was on the front end of golf's arrival in the United States. In January 1898, just 5 years after the Chicago Golf Club would become the first 18-hole course in the U.S., and 4 years after the formation of the United States Golf Association, the Hot Springs Golf Club was organized. It was just a 9-hole routing, but that first effort laid the groundwork for what would happen later in 1909. That year, the Hot Springs Golf and Country Club Association was formed. For the cost of $15,000, the association purchased a 240-acre parcel of land located 1.5 miles south of the city. There they would build a new and proper golf club. After a few years, the club made one of its smartest decisions, hiring golf course architect Willie Park Jr., the tweed-wearing Scotsman who had won 2 Open championships in the 1880s, and whose course designs in Europe and the United States had already included Kilspindie Golf Club, Sunningdale, and New Haven Country Club. Park spent a year here in Hot Springs tweaking the course, and additional improvements to the club's facilities made it an even more appealing attraction. The club's popularity continued to grow, as did the popularity of golf in the U.S. Interestingly, and perhaps surprising to many, in those early years, Hot Springs Golf Club was a sand green golf course. The putting surfaces were constructed by hauling out a parcel of ground and installing a hard clay base, then topping it off with sand and a thin layer of oil. This was especially important to me because I had grown up learning to play golf on a sand green course in Kansas, which is still open for play today, I might add. In that sense, I felt connected to the material, connected to Runyan, and connected to Hot Springs. For young Paul Runyan, then just learning to play golf under the guidance of the club's pro, Jimmy Norton, learning to play on sand greens was significant. In fact, I would contend that learning to play on a course with sand greens was among the most significant and often overlooked circumstances in Runyan's entire life. That's because through that circumstance and out of necessity, Runyan developed a short game technique that became the bedrock of his legendary career. To avoid the vagaries of sand greens, he learned to play his short shots low and along the ground, hugging the turf and the sand, the golf ball knuckling towards its final destination with a predictable amount of roll. In this environment, a legendary putter and chipper was born out of necessity. The pro Jimmy Norton was not the only golfer who influenced the boy. So did some of the stars from the world of professional golf, including another Scot, McDonald Smith, who came through Hot Springs to play in the city's big golf event, the South Central Open. Runyan caddied for Smith one year and marveled at the shots the great pro could hit. It was eye-opening, and it showed Runyan just how skillful elite professionals truly were. Besides the golf pro Jimmy Norton, Runyan was influenced by Hot Springs' adopted son, Logan A. Jack Vilas, an auto racer turned aviator who moved his family to Hot Springs in 1917 and constructed a 16-room prairie-style home known in the Vilas family as Golf Woods Farm. In my book, I write that Vilas must have been the envy of every boy in town. In 1913, a few years before he had moved to Hot Springs, he became the first pilot to fly across Lake Michigan, doing so in 1 hour and 40 minutes. His exploits, hunting, fishing, trapping, swimming, and even boxing, were well chronicled in the local newspapers. So was the time he spent as Hot Springs Assistant Chief of Police, during which he drew wide praise by nabbing the thieves who broke into the local high school and made off with $1,400 from the vault, then the largest known robbery in Hot Springs. It was a case that Vilas cracked in less than 24 hours, or so it was reported. In 1929, Vilas wrote an autobiography for his children, a 235-page treat of a book that recounted numerous feats of daring do from the first half of his life. Those feats included sometimes landing his airplane on what is now Malvern Road in Hot Springs. If you can't tell, Vilas was one of my favorite parts. There's a book to be written about him, too, by the way. Among his many talents, Vilas was a standout golfer. Runyan caddied for and later befriended Vilas, even emulating his grip on the club. And years later, when Runyan was getting started as a professional and money was tight, Vilas reached into his own wallet to loan Runyan some much-needed startup money. Runyan never forgot his friend's generosity. and would talk glowingly about Vilas for the rest of his life. My book follows Runyan from that Arkansas dairy farm up to North Dakota, and then back to Arkansas, specifically Little Rock, and then on to North Carolina, and New Jersey, and New York, and Pennsylvania, and then later to the West Coast, Pasadena, California, La Jolla, California, Palm Springs, and then even later, Seattle, Washington, Denver, Colorado, and other stops along the way. One of those stops down the road in Little Rock was where Runyan, then still just a teenager, landed a job as the golf professional at Concordia Country Club in 1926. There he would meet his future wife, Joan Harris, daughter of an insurance man from Kansas who had recently taken a promotion and moved his family to Arkansas. The story of Runyan meeting his wife is one of my favorite Paul Runyan stories. It happened one day when he was running through the golf shop at Concordia Country Club, supposedly to answer a phone call. He swung the clubhouse door open at full speed and struck Joan right in the face, knocking her flat on the floor. Of that face-on encounter with the clubhouse door, you might say that Joan was in the wrong place at the right time, or vice versa. Paul and Joan's wedding would take place at Joan's parents' house in Little Rock in the spring of 1931. And that's Joan pictured there with Paul on a bicycle. In all, I spent something like 3 years researching Runyan's journey. This book formally got its start in the year 2020, during the earliest days of the pandemic. But I think it would be unfair to call it a pandemic project. The process of considering the story of Runyan's life and his 1938 victory over Sam Snead had begun a year or so earlier while I was writing a magazine article of Phil Rogers, one of Runyan's most famous students for the Golfer's Journal. You might even say that for me, it began some 25 years before that, when a golf-obsessed teenager from Kansas first read a snippet about Runyan in one of the many golf books he read and reread again. That was me. I guess it just took 2.5 decades for the idea to take hold. To really know a subject, I believe you have to go out and find it in its natural habitat. In my case, writing events that mostly occurred decades before I was born, I needed to see the places where Paul and Joan Runyan spent their lives. So I traveled to Shawnee-on-the-Delaware, Pennsylvania, and La Jolla, California, and here to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and other stops in between. I tried to learn as much about these places as I did the people I was writing about, to better understand how the former may have affected the latter. The origin of Paul Runyan's nickname, Little Poison, eluded me for a good chunk of those 3 years, until finally one little nugget I came across in a 1980s newspaper article led me to another nugget, which eventually led me all the way back to 1931. That's when golf writer Lawrence Robinson of the New York World Telegram bestowed the nickname Little Poison upon Runyan. The nickname fit like a glove, and it led to marketing opportunities for Runyan and for Spalding Sporting Goods, including a Little Poison line of woods, irons, and of course putters. That association with Spalding also put Runyan in close contact with the legendary Bobby Jones, the biggest fish in the Spalding Sea, who Runyan had been paired with at the inaugural Masters tournament in 1934, an event Runyan nearly won, if not for a couple untimely mistakes. My book is about more than Runyan the golfer. It's largely about his legacy, which is strongly tied to his career as a golf instructor, which spanned more than half his life. It could be argued that Runyan influenced more lives in golf through his decades teaching the game than he did during the decade and a half when he was considered among the game's elite players. And I suppose that's the beauty of golf, right? A game that can be played from cradle to grave. A game that can be taught to the young and the old. A game that can be shared with family, friends, business colleagues, and amongst generations. There were a few surprises for me along my journey of discovering Paul Runyan. There was a duel outside Little Rock with the famed gambler Titanic Thompson. There was a mysterious debt that Runyan could finally repay after capturing the North and South Open at Pinehurst in 1930, his first real victory in pro golf. There were a series of heartbreaks in major tournaments as a young pro that tested not only Runyan's resolve and his self-belief, but even the very foundation upon which he had built his golf game. That a little guy could compete with big hitters sheerly through mastery of the short game. There was an unexpected hiatus from pro golf following World War II, when Paul and his wife Joan settled down and started a family, and rumors of his demise circulated among the press. And there were not one, but two near miracles late in his career, long after he should have had a prayer contending in major championship golf. Nearly winning the 1951 U.S. Open at beastly Oakland Hills, where during his first round 73, he was forced to hit 30 of his 73 shots with woods, and only once did he hit an iron from the fairway. And a decade later at the Open Championship at Royal Birkdale, where Runyan ignored the ghastly weather and the rain-soaked fairways to put a scare into the field, and its eventual champion, 31-year-old Arnold Palmer. Another surprise came early in the spring of 2022 during a research trip here to Hot Springs. After spending a few hours that morning at the Garland County Historical Society, I spent the afternoon at the Hot Springs Country Club. By chance, Jay Fox, the executive director of the Arkansas State Golf Association, happened to be on site that day, along with two associates. They were officiating a college event at the club. I spent part of my afternoon talking with Fox, who had the pleasure of knowing Runyan years before and playing golf with him. He was and is a great authority on the history of golf in Arkansas, and he helped answer some of my questions and pointed me in the right direction. But perhaps the best surprise of all was meeting Runyan's son, Jeff, a man now in his 70s, who was in the process of putting his house on the market and moving from the California desert when I spent a few days with him earlier that spring in 2022. In fact, it was about a month before I came to Hot Springs. Jeff and I had shared some phone conversations about his father, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect when I arrived to meet him at his house in La Quinta. Jeff Runyan told me stories about his father, his mother, his recently deceased brother, and what it had been like to grow up around La Jolla Country Club. La Jolla Country Club is where Runyan spent the majority of his years teaching the game from age 40 to his mid-50s. I think Jeff found part of it almost therapeutic, to talk about his father's life with someone, me, who was so interested, hanging on his every word. Like Jeff's mother, his father Paul had been cremated. And Jeff told me about his plans to spread his ashes back in Arkansas on his father's parents' graves. Those graves are at Greenwood Cemetery in Hot Springs, beneath the shadow of Hot Springs National Park, not far from the Oaklawn Racetrack and Casino, about 2 miles as the crow flies from the long-gone family dairy farm where Runyan learned to put in an honest day's work, and the adjacent country club where he had found his future. If the wind is right, who knows? Maybe some of those ashes would catch a gust of wind coming off the mountains and head south and east and find a landing spot on one of the narrow Bermuda fairways of Hot Springs Country Club, where Paul Runyan, then just a tiny caddy, became a man, where he learned to play golf, and where he learned the most valuable golf lesson of his lifetime, that how many would always trump how mighty. Thank you. Note on this photograph, it's the quality wasn't the greatest, and so I didn't use it in the publication of the book, but it's one of my favorites. This is, I believe, the last known photograph taken of Paul Runyan. It was just a few weeks before he died. There's an interesting story in my book. He had, the last golf lesson he ever gave, he was in Palm Springs, California. It was the early spring of 2002. and he gave a golf lesson to 2 retired flight attendants who had spent years traveling the globe together and had always thought about wanting to learn to play golf, and they finally decided to do it. And they took a lesson from Paul Runyan. One of those flight attendants knew who he was, and the other one not so much. And then a week or 10 days later, he passed away. He got pneumonia and died. He was in his 90s. And I tracked down both those flight attendants for the book and interviewed them. And it was kind of interesting. I asked them, did you, after that, did you continue playing golf? And they said, no. It never really felt the same after we read that Paul Runyan had passed away. It was like something was taken from them, too. But they had some wonderful things to say about him, including the fact that at that last lesson, he was still energetic and chipper. They could tell he was getting old and he was ill, but in no way to detract from the golf lesson. So I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has any. And go ahead.
Have you been able to pinpoint the location of the dairy farm? There's been some discussion and brief discussion of where that might have been.
That's the million-dollar question. Precisely no, I haven't. I can wager a couple guesses, but it's a bit of a riddle. In interviews later in life, Runyan talked about Shady Grove School, which was located nearby, was where he attended, I believe he attended kindergarten through 10th grade. Although his son told me that after 8th grade, his attendance was pretty limited those last couple of years because he was working at the dairy. But he talks about he would run basically across 2 or 3 fairways each morning on his way to school and then back to the dairy farm. So, unfortunately, I don't know which, he mentions the 4th hole of Hot Springs Country Club. But because the routing has changed over the years and there's 2 golf courses, it's a little shaky to me exactly where that dairy farm was. So my short answer is no, I never did. I wanted to include that in the book, but I just didn't feel confident enough to pin that down.
The golf course was the Majestic.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So it would be and unfortunately, that was one of the things that I tried to track down when I was here. The other great mystery was the house where he was born, 19 Baker Street. So I drove over there. I had met with Liz the first day I was here, and about half a day's worth of research. And then I went that afternoon to the country club, and then I drove over to try to find the house. And I thought I found it. And then I went back to the Historical Society the very next day, and there were a couple of volunteers in there, and one of them, an older gentleman whose name unfortunately escapes me at the moment, we tracked down a couple of old Sanborn insurance maps. And what I learned was that address had moved. So what I thought was his house when I first went there was a vacant lot. But based on this insurance map, I actually think his house is right up the street about 30 yards from there where there is a house standing. I knocked on the door, nobody answered. I was not able to determine whether that house was original or not. It was in pretty rough shape. So I can, again, I dare you to pinpoint down that address, but I can narrow it down within about a 50-yard circle. I'm just not quite sure exactly which lot it was. So.
Are there any pictures at the country club of him?
There are. In fact, in the archives at the Historical Society, Liz, I believe there's a couple, 2 or 3. The country club itself, when I was there a year ago, had a few on display. I think 1 or 2 in the locker room or the grill room. I'm not sure if they're still up or not. I think both of those were maybe from like the 1940s or 50s. So, question?
Well, in the spirit, what's a comment? In the spirit of 2 degrees of separation, you heard me do the little spiel for Hidden Hot Springs.
Right.
Well, one of our homes last year was Jack Velas's house.
I was aware of that. In fact, Liz told me that. Yeah.
And I did quite a bit of research on him. He is a colorful character. If
He
there's
was.
anything I have that you don't have.
Velas was a very colorful character. If you've read my book, you'll know that I tracked down his granddaughter,
Yes.
who is a research scientist in Tucson, Arizona, who I think maybe has a second home here in Hot Springs. Maybe you know that. But she spent, it sounds like, half of her adult life uncovering, peeling back the layers of the onion that was her grandfather. He was a complicated man. He was larger than life as a young man. Then he had some marital difficulties and family difficulties. Yeah, again, there's a book to be written. And he, like I said, he's written his own autobiography, which is a treat of a book. It's a fascinating read. But he was a very, very interesting character, and I'm so glad I stumbled onto him. It's funny because I would never have found his name if not for, there was a video on YouTube where Paul Runyan mentioned learning to grip the golf club based on the way he saw Jack Vilas put his hands on the club as a young man. And if it wasn't, so I Googled Jack Vilas and, you know, click, 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 one thing leads to another. Without the internet, I probably would never have been able to do that, right? So the internet, which it can lead you down some rabbit holes, but it can also yield some incredible, incredible stuff. And that was one of the things that I found. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, well, ironically, you were talking about the slam door and the marriage proposal. Jack actually once shot his wife, and fortunately, it went through her hat.
Yeah.
Which had these elaborate feathers on it, so they were.
I think I was unaware of that story.
He wasn't trying to hit her.
Oh, no.
He was
accidentally shot.
Again, a larger-than-life character in so many ways.
It's my understanding that the actor Alan Ladd, who would be around Runyan's age, was born a little ways across Malvern Highway. And I also heard that when in his younger days, his family had a sheep farm or a cattle farm where one of the golf courses is. So my question is, in your research, did you by chance run across that part of that area of the story?
No, I did not. This is the first I've heard of that, actually.
And the cabin that Alan Ladd was born in still exists.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But like I said, it's Alan Ladd grew up in that same area, sheep farmer, then Runyan had a dairy, so they had to have cross paths.
You would imagine, right? In fact, speaking of actors, there's a photo in my book. In the 1930s, Runyan and some other professional golfers made a trip to Australia to play an exhibition tour. And on their ocean liner was the actor Spencer Tracy. And there's a couple photos that Runyan's wife, Joan, took of Runyan with Spencer Tracy and the captain of the ship. And I included one of those photos in my book. But that goes back to my great surprise of meeting Jeff Runyan, Paul's son. He had a trunk full of his father's materials that he had basically kept in storage for 20 years since his father died. And I was near the end of my book. Like, I almost didn't get to see this material before I sent the manuscript off to the publisher. And I'm so glad I did, because I found some good stuff in there, including some photographs of Spencer Tracy, and Paul Runyan had saved like the brochure for the ocean liner for a different trip to Australia, actually. Just all kinds of cool stuff in there. And as a researcher, when you find that stuff, it's just like gold, you know, and you want to just keep turning the pages and finding more of it and more of it. So I was really lucky in that regard.
And your book is available?
Great question. So, the best question of the day. I have some here. I'd be happy to sell anybody a copy if they would like one. You can also find it on Amazon if you search for Little Poison or if you search for my name. And then it's also, I believe, if you order online from Walmart or Target, you can find it there. And then you can also order it direct from the publisher, which was the University of Nebraska Press on its website. So, but I have about maybe 10 or a dozen copies today, and I'd be happy to sell anybody a copy who'd like one. So. Thank you all so much. This was a pleasure to be here. I'm so glad I made it back, Liz. When you asked, I didn't even think twice. It was an instant yes, as long as the dates work. So,
Wasn't that a great program? Thank you so much, John. He'll be up here if y'all like to come by and meet him or buy a book or whatever. And then the girls are back there with the items. And also, I want to let you all know that September 15th is the last day that you can join the Historical Society under the deadline for your name to be listed up in the front of the book. So if you know if you're current or not, you may want to check with Liz or call the Historical Society tomorrow. You can pick up a brochure here, or you can join online. And we want to thank John, and we want to thank Paul so much. It was a great program, and thank you all for coming. We'll see you next month.